Hi everyone, welcome back to my YouTube channel, Life Sciences by Tumi Selane. On today's lesson is lesson 7 on thermoregulation. This is actually the very last lesson on our lesson series on the endocrine system and homeostasis. Now, what is thermoregulation? Thermoregulation, the prefix thermo refers to heat and regulation means control. Okay? Our body temperature, remember, should be around 37 degrees Celsius optimum. If it rises above normal, that is going to have consequences. And if it decreases below normal, that is also going to have consequences. So with thermoregulation, we are looking at how the body reacts to maintain a constant internal environment of around 37 degrees Celsius. Let's get right into it. Okay. The introduction. First bullet. Our bodies can maintain a constant body temperature of approximately 36.8 degrees Celsius. So our optimum internal body environment should be 36.8 degrees Celsius, which we like to round off to around 37 degrees Celsius. Okay. Even when the outside temperatures are very high or very low. So this statement is essentially explaining that our body temperature should not be affected by the outside temperature. When the outside temperature becomes too high, when the outside temperature becomes too high, the body negative feedback must kick in to decrease the body temperature back to normal, 36.8 degrees Celsius. Again, when the body temperature reduces below normal, negative feedback must kick in to increase the body temperature back to an optimum of 36.8 degrees Celsius. So, our internal environment should not be influenced by the external environment or the external temperature. Second bullet, it is vital that this happens to ensure that all metabolic functions continue. Remember, guys, when we talk about metabolic functions, we are talking about functions inside the body, the chemical reactions that happen in your cells, between your cells, and between your tissues. They require an environment or a temperature of 36.8 degrees Celsius. If it is too hot, there are consequences. If it drops below that, there will also be consequences. But why? This is explained in bullet number 3. If the body temperature were to drop below 36.8 degrees Celsius, below that, so below optimum, metabolic processes will slow down. Why will metabolic processes slow down? Because enzymes that are responsible for metabolic processes will become less active. Okay, so the enzymes that are responsible for metabolic processes in the body work their best at a temperature of 36.8 degrees Celsius. So they are sensitive to heat. Okay, so they work their best at an optimum temperature of 36.8 degrees Celsius. All right. If the body's temperature drops below 36.8 degrees Celsius, then the enzymes become less active, and then the metabolic processes will slow down. Okay, but let's look at bullet number 4. And the temperature were to be raised above the safe level of 37.5 degrees Celsius. Okay, now we said that the optimum is 36.8 degrees Celsius. This is the temperature where the enzymes work their best. But if there is a rise anywhere between 36.8 degrees Celsius to 37.5 degrees Celsius, that is a safe range. Okay, guys? But if there is a rise beyond that, then the enzymes will denature because the temperature is too hot for them, meaning the chemical integrity of the enzymes will change, or the chemical structure of the enzymes will change. And if the chemical structure of the enzymes change, how will that affect the metabolic processes? They will be disabled. Okay, so the enzymes at extremely high temperatures will denature, thereby affecting the body's metabolic processes by disabling the metabolic processes, okay? By rendering the processes non-functional. They will stop. And yeah, basically this will have catastrophic impacts on our lives, okay? But what do we mean by metabolic processes? We are talking about processes such as mitosis, processes such as digestion, processes such as DNA replication, okay? All of those are metabolic processes that happen inside the body. So if the enzymes denature, then all of those processes will not be able to take place. Okay. The last bullet, the way in which the body manages to control the internal core temperature, when external environmental conditions changed, is called thermoregulation. Remember what I said on the first slide? The word thermo refers to heat, and the word regulation refers to control. So essentially, what thermoregulation is the control of the body's internal temperature levels to maintain the body temperature at an optimum of 36.8 degrees Celsius is homeostasis of the body's temperature. Okay, guys? Now, exactly how does that happen? We will see in the following slides. All right. Now, the organ that is responsible for controlling the body's internal temperature is the skin. So before we look at how the skin does this, we need to look at the cross-section of the skin. So these are not all the different parts of the skin. I have only included the parts of the skin that are relevant for grade 12 purposes when looking at how the body controls or regulates its internal temperature levels. So let us study the structure of the skin and look at the parts that are relevant for this lesson. Okay, so the skin is divided into three main parts, but I'm only going to include two here. So we have, firstly, the dermis. As you can see, the dermis is this layer of the skin. The parts that are relevant that we are going to be looking at in terms of thermoregulation are the blood capillaries, as well as we are going to be looking at the sweat gland, which produces sweat. the sweat ducts. Okay, so the sweat gland produces sweat. So the sweat will be produced from here, and then it will be secreted into the sweat duct, and it will travel up, 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 up to the sweat pore. The sweat pore is there, and then the sweat will be released to the surface of the skin over there. Okay, and then in the dermis, we'll also have heat receptors that pick up the stimulus, which is of course heat. When it is too hot, the heat receptors will be stimulated, or when it will be too cold, the heat receptors in the dermis of the skin also pick up the drop in temperature. And then, like I said, in the dermis, we have the sweat pore, which releases the sweat. Okay, and this, of course, will be the skin, surface. Okay, guys? So, in terms of thermoregulation, we are going to be looking at the activity of the blood capillaries when temperature drops below or above optimum, and we are going to be looking at the activities of the sweat gland when the temperature drops or rises above normal. All right, guys, let us go to the next slide. Effect of temperature on blood capillaries and sweat glands. So there is only two structures that we are going to be looking at, guys. Like I said in the previous slide, we'll be looking at the activity of the blood capillaries and the activities of the sweat glands when there's a rise or drop in the body's internal temperature. Okay, now, if a person is in a cold environment, remember, we are looking at two things: the activity of the blood capillaries and the activities of the sweat gland. Okay, now, if a person is exposed to cold environments, what are the blood vessels going to do? The blood vessels, or rather the blood capillaries, are going to constrict. Okay? Now, think of Think of cold environment, then the blood capillaries react by constricting. In cold environments, the blood capillaries constrict. And when the blood capillaries constrict, we say that is vasoconstriction. As you can see over there, the blood capillaries constrict. What does constrict mean? Constrict means that they become more narrow. Okay? They become more narrow. When they become more narrow, less blood travels to the surface of the skin. And remember, blood is carrying the heat of the internal body. So when the blood capillaries constrict, less blood is taken to the surface of the skin, and then the skin will lose less heat, as you can see over there. Okay. Now, on a hot day, what happens to the blood capillaries? On a hot day, the blood capillaries will dilate, and we call that vasodilation. Okay? Remember, on a cold day, they constrict. and then there will be less blood taken to the surface of the skin, and then less heat will be lost through radiation. But on a hot day, the blood capillaries will dilate. Dilate means they become wider. Okay, they become wider. On a cold day, they constrict, they become more narrow. Okay, so on a hot day, when they dilate, we call that vasodilation. More blood and more heat is taken to the surface of the skin, and more heat is lost through radiation. So that's what happens on a cold day and a hot day to the blood capillaries. Now, secondly, we said we are going to look at the activities of the sweat glands. Okay? Now, let's start off with on a hot day. On a hot day, the sweat gland begin to secrete more sweat, causing heat loss. Okay, more sweat on a hot day. The sweat glands will make more sweat, and the sweat will move by the sweat duct to the sweat pore, and more sweat will be released. Okay, and on a cold day, we know this, then the sweat glands stop producing sweat. So if they stop producing sweat, therefore on the sweat pore, what's going to happen? Less sweat. Less or no sweat will be released. Okay, so the activity of the sweat gland, guys, on a cold or hot day, that would not be difficult. Okay, what you need to memorize is that on a cold day, the blood vessels will constrict, meaning become more narrow. Less blood and less heat is taken to the surface of the skin, and then less heat will be lost. But on a hot day, the blood vessels will dilate, more blood and more heat will be taken to the surface of the skin, and more heat will be lost through radiation. Let's look at the text. When it is too hot, the blood capillaries will become wider, meaning they will widen or dilate. We call that vasodilation. And then more blood will flow to the skin, and then more heat will be lost through radiation. And then the sweat glands, we know on a hot day, this is not something very difficult to memorize. On a hot day, sweat glands release more sweat, and then the sweat will get to the surface of the skin and will evaporate, removing more heat from the skin. When it is too cold, what did we say? When it is too cold, the blood capillaries will become more narrow, or the blood capillaries will constrict. We call that vasoconstriction. And then what is going to happen? Less blood flow to the skin, and then more heat will be conserved, or less heat will be lost from the body. Sweat gland, when it is cold, again, this is not something very difficult. When it is cold, sweat glands release less or no sweat. Okay, guys? All right. Now, let us contextualize this in a question to show you how a question may be asked and how you're supposed to answer it and how we mark this. When there is an increase in body temperature, okay, when there is an increase in body temperature, receptors in the hypothalamus are stimulated. Remember, the hypothalamus is the center for thermoregulation, or the control of temperature, okay? Remember, the golden rule, like we did in the previous lessons, the golden rule, number one, when you are answering a question on homeostasis of any substance, you must firstly indicate which center detects a change. Detect. Secondly, you must talk about the reaction. How will the body react to this change? Thirdly, you must state, in this case, because there's no hormone, you must state the conclusion. Or the end result. Because here there is no hormones that are regulating body temperature. Remember, the reaction, in this case, we are talking about two things. We are talking about the blood. You must tell us how the blood capillaries are going to react, and how are the sweat glands going to react. We are looking at two sweat glands are going to react. Okay, let's check. So when the body temperature increases above normal, what will detect? These are the receptor cells where in the hypothalamus they will be stimulated, which send an impulse to the, firstly, blood capillaries of the skin. How will they react? The blood capillaries will dilate, or you can say vasodilation will occur. So when the blood capillaries dilate, remember, more blood flows to the skin and more heat is lost by radiation. Okay, guys? The easier part to answer is the following. Okay. So these are the reaction of the blood capillaries. Okay. Blood capillaries. But we also need to describe what happens to the sweat glands. More blood flows to the sweat glands. The sweat glands produce more sweat. Please, guys, more, very important, more sweat to lower the body temperature back to normal, to lower the body temperature back to normal. All right. Now, the inverse, on a cold day or when there is a decrease in body temperature, remember, cold goes with constrict. So the blood vessels must constrict, or vasoconstriction must take place. Again, receptor cells in the hypothalamus are stimulated to send an impulse to the blood capillaries to do what? Blood capillaries constrict, or vasoconstriction takes place. Remember, cold, constrict. Then less blood flows to the skin and less heat is lost by radiation. All right. So that is, remember, the blood capillaries. But what happens to the sweat glands? Less blood flows to the sweat glands. The sweat glands produce less or no sweat. So you can actually say less sweat or no sweat. Oh, sorry. Yeah. So that's the end of it. Okay, guys? Now, this is quite easy to memorize. Okay, guys? What you must know. I reiterate what you must know. There are two things that, or two structures that help with regulation of blood. Okay? Firstly, it is the blood. You must refer to the blood capillaries. You must refer to the blood capillaries. When it is too cold, the blood capillaries they will constrict. And then when they constrict, less blood is taken to the skin, less heat is lost. Okay? And then when it is too hot, they dilate. The blood capillaries dilate, or vasodilation will take place. More heat and more blood is taken to the surface of the skin, and more heat is lost through radiation. And then you must also refer to the sweat glands. Sweat glands. The sweat glands. This one is not difficult. When it is too cold, less blood is taken to the sweat glands, and then the sweat glands will produce less sweat, and then less sweat is released. And then when it is too hot, more blood is taken to the sweat glands, and then the sweat glands produce more sweat, and then more sweat is released, and then it evaporates to the surface of the skin, hence that cooling feeling you get on your skin when wind blows over your skin on a hot day when you are sweating. Okay, let's now look at an activity. Our last activity on the series of the endocrine system and homeostasis. Okay, there are the questions. It is a graph type question. Let us study. So we have diagram A, and we have diagram 1 and diagram 2. Let us study. Let's see what's happening. So you have two things. So here we have the blood capillaries, and there we have the sweat glands. Sweat glands, diagram A, producing more sweat in diagram 1. And as you can see, the blood vessels have dilated. So when the blood vessels have dilated, then it means more blood is taken to the skin and more heat will be lost. And then on diagram 2, we have no sweat produced by the sweat glands, and then the blood vessels are constricted. The blood vessels have constricted. Okay, when the blood vessels have constricted, it means that less heat and less blood is taken to the surface of the skin, and more heat is retained or less heat is lost. So diagram A, diagram 1 rather, is showing a person during a hot day, and diagram 2, because the blood vessels have constricted, is showing a person during a cold day. Cold day, constrict. Okay, let us look at the graph. Let us study the graph. As you can see from the graph, we have 37 degrees Celsius being the normal body temperature. And then from 0 to around 20, the body temperature is increasing. And then from 20 to 50, it is decreasing back to normal. And when that is when the person, after the person has underwent strenuous exercise, obviously the body temperature will increase. And then during a cold shower at 18 degrees Celsius, then the body temperature is bound to do what? The body temperature is bound to decrease because the shower water is cold, and then the body temperature will in fact increase from that point to this point. The body temperature increases back to normal. Okay, let's look at the questions. Question number 1. Which part of the brain responds to the temperature changes that occur at A and B on the graph? At A and B on the graph. Meaning, A, as you can see, body temperature was above normal. It is now decreasing back to normal. And then B, the body temperature is below normal and it increases back to normal. So which part of the brain is responsible for this response? The answer would be, of course, the hypothalamus, for 1 mark. Question number 2, what is the maximum temperature reached? What is the maximum temperature reached? Now, you take your ruler and then you do that. That is the peak. And then the answer would be, and then you check there. Yes, you check there. The maximum temperature is 37, not 3.7, is 37.5. And remember to include the unit of measurement, degrees Celsius, because now if you just say 37.5, you won't get that mark. Remember to always include the unit of measurement. It's 37.5 degrees Celsius. Like we said, that is the safe zone. Okay? For what period? For what period of time? Remember, for the period of time, we look at the x-axis, guys, because that's the axis that includes time. For what period did the person engage in strenuous exercise? Period. Period, not for how long. Period. So you need to state the beginning of the period and the end of the period. Okay. So they started from this point and stopped at that point. Okay. This, let's say, for example, is 5 minutes, and then ended at around 15. 5, because it's before 10, between 0 and 10, 15 between 10 and 20. So I don't think I have the correct answer here. Yes, this is not the correct answer. Okay. The correct answer is from 5 to 15 minutes. The question is not asking for how long. If it said for how long, you would say for 15 minutes. But it is asking for the period, okay, when he started to when he ended. All right. Question number 4. Why should the body temperature not be allowed to fluctuate too much? Fluctuate too much, meaning increase above normal, then decrease to normal, then decrease below normal, and increase again, right? At regular intervals. What's the problem? We looked at the answers to this question in slide number 2. Let's check. If the temperature is below normal, enzymes that control metabolic reactions work slower or become inactive. Okay, 1 mark, thus slowing down the body's metabolic rate or metabolic reactions. What about if it rises above optimum? What's going to happen? If the temperature is above normal, enzymes that control metabolic reactions denature, 1 mark, thus slowing down the body's metabolic rate or slowing down the body's metabolic activities. Okay, so 2 marks for explaining what happens to the body's metabolic reactions when the temperature is too low, and 2 marks for explaining what happens to the body's metabolic reactions when the temperature is too high. Okay. Which diagram, 1 or 2, guys? Diagram, not graph or period. Diagram, 1 or 2, would represent the condition of the skin after 15 minutes. So after 15 minutes, there we have our 15 minutes. After 15 minutes, after the strenuous body, after the strenuous, exercise, after the strenuous exercise, which diagram, 1 or 2, would represent the condition of the skin after the strenuous exercise? During the strenuous exercise, remember, the body temperature goes up. All right? Now, when the body temperature goes up, what is going to happen to reduce the body temperature back to normal? Okay. The blood capillaries must dilate to allow more heat and more blood to travel to the skin, and more heat is lost. Okay? The sweat glands must produce more sweat over there. Okay? In order to give the body the cooling effect. Okay, guys? So, the correct diagram that represents the skin when it is too hot after or during strenuous body exercise would be diagram 1. Let's see if that's the correct answer. Yes. And of course, the following question would say, explain your answer to question 5. Why did you say diagram 1? We said diagram 1 because after or during strenuous exercise, which is 15 minutes, what's going to happen? Ooh, excuse me. I'm having an issue here. Let me just fix it quickly. Okay, guys, sorry for that. Okay, so we said diagram 1. Why do we say diagram 1? Blood capillaries dilate or vasodilation occurs. 1 mark. So you can say vasodilation occurs or you can say blood capillaries dilate. And then second reason is that sweat is being produced. Second mark, sweat is being produced. So as we can see, it's not just enough to memorize what happens to the blood capillaries and blood vessels when the temperature increases or decreases below normal. You must also memorize and be able to apply this to investigations or set of facts that you might be examined on. Okay, guys, with that being said, that is the end of our lesson series on the endocrine system and homeostasis. I hope that this lesson series has been positive and it has been impactful. I will see you guys next time. Goodbye and good luck.